Welcome everyone to another episode of the Dungeon Diaries, where we bring you the latest Guild Guardian updates. Today we'll be covering the GOG demo and everything Web3 gaming. Our special guest with me today, as I'm joined by Derek Lau, the game director of Guild Guardians, and Robbie Ferguson, the co-founder of Immutable. Welcome guys, and thanks for coming in.
Thanks Ryan, good to be here.
Excited for this one.
Yeah, it's great to have a live stream with you two on. I think the community is going to be super excited. So I know we have a lot of people from the GOG demo who have tuned in today. So as we get started, I'd definitely love to hear what people's favorite aspects of the demo have been so far. So make sure you just leave a comment down below, and maybe I'll feature some as we go through some of these questions. Okay. So I think we'll just start off with the questions now, Robbie. So for question one, to start off, how would you explain what Immutable is to someone who is still wrapping their minds around what an NFT even is?
Immutable is the world's leading platform for the next generation of Web3 games. We power apps, marketplaces, and more to mint millions and millions of NFTs at zero gas cost, completely carbon neutrally, and also to do so while having these orders linked between every marketplace that wants to trade them. And we also do so with the full security of Ethereum, if you've seen these sort of security incidents over the past 4 months. But we also have this studio side of our business, which is led by Justin Hulog and obviously Derek Lau and Chris Clay leading Guild of Guardians and Gods Unchained, respectively. And the goal here is to build AAA content, which is going to achieve the next 100 million players on Web3, and then help use the learnings of IP and economy designs from these games to share with all our partners as well. Because we really think right now, the space is supply constrained. People want to play these games, and we're seeing emergent and successful economic models, but we need more high quality content in order for these sort of the space to truly pop off in the next couple of years. So that's our sort of efforts on the studio side of the business.
Thanks for that rundown. And yeah, I think a lot of people are still very focused on what the term NFT, you're always hearing people have lots of backlash on it. But I think at the end of the day, what really matters is the actual underlying products that are being developed. And that's what Immutable is obviously focused on, right? Utility-driven NFTs. So really thanks for that breakdown, Robbie. And I think just going on from that question, Derek. So recently, Guild of Guardians obviously has launched its demo. And it's actually gotten quite good positive reception from, from the Discord and on Super Stonk as well. And so for people who aren't actually too familiar with Guild of Guardians in terms of like its overall vision from the beginning, what would you say makes us different from the typical hack and slash mobile RPG?
Sure. So taking a step back, so Guild of Guardians is a mobile team RPG. It's free to play, so you can just download it from the App Store and start playing. And in the game, you effectively have a team of heroes which you send and battle through dungeons, earn equipment, level up, and so on. The mission for Guild of Guardians is we want to build a really meaningful game that's just purely fun and that's made even better for players through the blockchain. In terms of, for people who don't know what it is, we recently released a limited version of the game through a demo where players were able to experience several worlds. So that means 36 different dungeons which they could play through and different heroes as well. And we've been receiving pretty good feedback on that.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, with Web3 games, it's going to feel very similar to traditional gaming, but like you said, it's just going to be enhanced with blockchain. And I think that's really what our ultimate vision is at the end of the day. And it's shifting away from the power from centralized studios to actual people who are within these ecosystems. So thanks for that, Derek. And so the next question is for you, Robbie, again. So building on top of the last question, if we actually zoom out a little from Guild Guardians, we of course have Immutable. So Immutable is on a mission to tokenize the entire world, with gaming being its first vertical and focus. So how will the integration of blockchain and NFTs actually transform the gaming industry?
Yeah, well, if you have hours, we can get through all of it, but I'll give a very brief summary. So I think the fundamental thing that Web3 is going to bring to gaming is it's going to align the incentives between the people creating games and the people playing them. And the reason that matters the most is it doesn't matter what type of game you're building, whether it's an MMORPG, a mobile RPG, or an FPS or a MOBA. It doesn't matter what your particular economy design is. You are always motivated to make decisions that are better for the economy and the players in the long run. And we're going to see the dominant business models be one that give more value away rather than have this captive business model, which we see today, where we see literally $100 billion being spent every year on in-game items by players that they have zero ownership rights to. And we think the fundamental prop is that people should have ownership over this stuff in the same way they do in the real world. And so I think we see a few emergent business models coming today. The first is this idea of play and earn, or sort of token-driven growth for these economies. And the thing that's really meaningful is we're just taking the $2 billion spent by a large game on Google and Facebook ads, and instead we're using that to back and create an economy that can motivate people to come and join a game, to share the game with their friends, and to stick around in the game for longer. And the really awesome thing is it effectively becomes this cooperative where people can own pieces of this game. You know, if you own a hero in Guild of Guardians, you have skin in the game, and you're motivated to stick around and share and become part of this community in a much stronger way than if you're just sort of, you know, have these lines in a database. I think there's also really exciting new business models that'll emerge that do things that are not possible in Web 2. People talk a lot about interoperability, which I think is exciting, but I'm also excited about the open incentives for anyone to build third-party value for these assets. So in Gods Unchained, for instance, we have third-party marketplaces which have earned over 7 figures by building an excellent deck building and choosing experience. We have guilds now, which have completely turned the model of advertising on its head. Instead of me, a gaming studio, going out and paying an ad company to run ads, we have guilds who are scouring the market to find undervalued games or content. They're then going and buying a whole bunch of NFTs or fungible tokens in that game, and then making it popular with this collective of people. So you have incentives to be able to find, you know, undervalued content. Or finally, you have it impacting metagame design. You know, you can say, well, I think this character is actually undervalued, and that you can build a really effective meta strategy with it. You can corner the market on that character. You can release a popular strategy for how to use it in a competitive meta, and suddenly you've made money. So I think there are all these really fascinating ways that it expands beyond just that final concept of aligning incentives, but that is what it comes down to. We can build a better business model for players and the gaming industry, and we can do so while making sure these economies are much longer term oriented.
Yeah, 100%. I think you could obviously talk for hours, you know, on what actual blockchain integration can mean for games.
Yeah.
And I think just to go back on the original point, and I actually want to ask you to this. So obviously, Immutable chose the vertical of gaming first for a reason. And I think with, you know, with the concepts of like DeFi and becoming bankless, I think if people kind of zoom out from the kind of crypto bubble in a sense, you kind of realize that the world isn't quite ready just for that, you know, transitioning from, you know, traditional banking service, for example, into DeFi. So I think what gaming can really do is that it's obviously universally understood. So do you think that you kind of align with this view, Robbie? And that's exactly why you feel like Immutable has chosen this vertical?
So the total users on Web3 today is around 30 million sort of active wallets, which is not many. One hit game with 100 million players will triple the user base of crypto overnight. And so I'm very bullish on Web3 being, you know, gaming being the Trojan horse by which the value of Web3 can be brought to people. And obviously Immutable's thesis is that NFTs will eventually tokenize everything from finance to real estate to real world assets and more. And I think the exciting thing is that we are really focused on building mainstream experiences with mainstream onboarding that mean that people don't even know what these NFTs are under the hood. You know, if you look at games like Guild of Guardians, where the goal is really to build a mass market mobile RPG that's incredibly accessible, where the economy is a reason to stick around, but it's not the fundamental reason the game is fun to play. I think that is the sort of strategy that needs to be taken in order to hit these numbers. And our thesis is very simple, which is, you know, if we get this right, then games can be the same as they are in Web 2, but they'll be 50 or 100% more successful in Web 3. And I think that's when we have the distribution edge, that a huge supply of that content will just flock over, in the same way that, you know, mobile games became dominant or social games became dominant back in the Zynga era.
Yep, and you definitely touched on mainstream experiences, which I think is the key here, right, for mass adoption, obviously. And speaking of mainstream experiences, you've actually become quite an icon within the Super Song community recently. It seems like anything you post on Twitter just like magically ends up as a thread there, funnily enough, with like 10,000 upvotes and everything. And so, yeah, that just leads me to the next question, which is like earlier this year, GameStop partnered up with Immutable as they made their transition into Web3, right? So what impact will GameStop bring to the space, and what would this actually mean for Immutable as a whole?
Yeah, obviously really exciting to work with GameStop and the other marketplaces that Immutable's working with. I think GameStop's in a really unique position because of their community. At the end of the day, community is at the core of building a good game in Web3 and the core of building a good protocol in Web3. And that's because the players are the owners. The players have the skin in the game. And I think nowhere have we seen this more analogously in Web2 than with, the saga of GameStop. And then from the sort of more commercial perspective, they obviously have huge distribution with more than 50 million customers worldwide, and an enormous retail base. And I'm excited to leverage that through sort of digital assets. So stay tuned, as we'll be, we've already worked on this historically with partners like Colex, and I think there'll be a ton more of this coming. And that's a good way to onboard, the next kind of 10 million players as well. So I think it's going to have tremendous impact. I think the result of getting tens of thousands of people signed up off a single Reddit post is a clear example of the power of this community today. But I mean, it's just getting started, right? Because as soon as we continue to make products that people are actually excited to use, these communities will be tapped. Because right now they're coming in like there's some stuff to use, but as soon as these games are there, as soon as the onboarding is simple, we get the conversion rate from 1% to 50% for these communities of hundreds of millions of people.
Yeah, I think a lot of people, especially when Immutable kind of launched that announcement partnership, like there was some skepticism, I guess, in the sense that, people, they didn't really see GameStop as like, it's like, oh, isn't that the main stock or whatever? But I think a lot of people, they kind of underestimate just how much, influence they actually have in the world. And the fact that they're becoming one of the more bigger mainstream studios to actually go full into the Web3 space, I think people can really be underestimating, what can actually happen. And I feel like, the documentaries where, they look back 5 years from now, how a company goes from, one place to another. I definitely see, a company like GameStop being right up there. So the next question is for you, Derek. So Guild Guardians is still at an early stage of development. So what can players expect? Obviously people have been playing it for like 3, 4, 5 days now. So, but what can they expect in the future, like in terms of gameplay, content, visuals, and polish?
Cool. So there's a few pillars in Guild of Guardians, right? I think the first one is, as Robbie touched on, we're really building a game for a mass audience. And so for us, we really care about the ability for users to come in, play the game and have fun, and not worry about creating a wallet. It should just seem like a normal game they're playing. And maybe they don't even realize there's blockchain until later in the game. We don't even need to call things NFTs or crypto assets in the game. So that's number one. The second is, just like any other kind of popular mobile RPG, a lot of the game centered around progression. So we want players to be playing the game for years, not months. So there's going to be a lot of content in the game, lots of ways to progress, lots of different ways to play, right? And lots of things that will come out even after the game's released. So even when we first launch the game, we expect that to be the first iteration of Guild of Guardians, and for more, releases, content, modes to come out later on. The other really unique thing about Guild of Guardians as well is the social aspect. And so we want our players to make friends, to play with other people in their guild, to strategize and talk with other people and think about the best way to play together, to beat the other guilds and so on, right? And I think, we really believe that games are more fun with friends. It's proven in the statistics as well. And this is something that we want players to experience, and ties in very well with the idea of this blockchain and the economy as well, where people are they're not playing it by themselves. They're part of this big global economy. Everyone's interacting with each other, and they're building these relationships along the way. And the third element as well is we really want people to be able to kind of collect things in the game and show off. Right now in the mobile gaming industry, collecting, summoning is a big part of the game. We want that to be part of the experience. We want people to, get that rare hero or get that rare item, be able to show it off to their friends, be able to kind of have their name on the leaderboards and competing in that way. So those are kind of some of the key pillars to expect when you're playing the game.
Yeah, thanks for that breakdown, Derek. And I think you actually touched on, you want people to be playing the game for years, right? Not days. And I think that kind of, goes back to retention. And I think I remember, Robbie, you actually mentioned in an interview before that the Web3 games didn't actually have that playbook just yet, where games can come in and they have like a, kind of like traditional games where if any big studio wants to kind of create a mobile game right now, they have a pretty good idea of how to go about it. But right now we're still actually exploring, what the actual right model is, even if there is a right model, right? There's so many different ways to go about it. So can you kind of expand on, that concept of having a playbook? And yeah.
So if you look back through every major shift in the way we distribute content, and in particular games, each of them has basically followed the same process, which has been a new technology is invented, early movers embrace the new technology and try to develop hit content. The hit content that's successful then creates playbooks, and suddenly you have an influx of everyone moving to this new distribution method because it has proven business advantages and there is a clear way for you to do it without having to speculate or experiment with design. And we saw this with social. So we saw the rise of social games on Facebook and leveraging the social graph, in particular, a lot of performance marketing as well around the Zynga period. And that only really became popular after we had some key hits like Farmville or like Mafia Wars, which was skinned into 20 more games, some made for kids around hair salons. Same thing happened with mobile and Supercell, and the same thing happened with the shift to free-to-play. And I might add that every single one of these industries faced immense skepticism and backlash from gamers in the early days. People said, why would I want to play a game where I buy in-game items, but I don't have to pay to actually play the game in the first place? People say, why would I want to play a game on Facebook rather than it being on a hardware that was sophisticated and could kind of run high-quality graphics? So I think we have to see the same thing for crypto, which is we have at our fingertips technology that can be an incredibly powerful alignment tool, growth lever, and distribution mechanism for gaming content to be popularized. We've seen the earliest starts of these, with viral economies that eventually failed because they failed to become sustainable. But our goal at Immutable, and what we have literally already shipped to partners today, is here is our version of economic playbooks that are incredibly simple for you to implement, whether you're running a MOBA, an FPS with skins, or a deeply Web3 game. And I think the goal is to make it as simple as possible for someone to have a sustainable but highly growth-driven economy that leverages the aspects of Web3, which is the ability to essentially motivate players to either join, share, or stick around in your game based on the creation of new, real tradable content, and also to monetize through new strategies like secondary fees instead of primary extracting value through sales. So again, a lot of people in the industry right now are saying we've got to have these experiments and these sort of creative Web3 native things. Those are fun. I think they'll end up actually being a separate genre of game. What we need is fundamentally robust and proven models that any studio can use from the Web2 world to make a successful Web3 game that's fairer and better for players, but also results in massive distribution and growth.
Thanks for that answer, Robbie.
Can I just add one thing there as well? So I think I completely agree with Robbie, and I think the thing to emphasize there is that we're very early. So, we're at the stage where people are trying to copy existing models and just add blockchain in somehow, just make a few things tradable. And to me, that's analogous to early days of the internet where people were just taking a photo of the phone book and then uploading it online. They're using the technology, but not to the full potential. And I think what we're really focused on at Immutable is how can we use the technology in a way that fundamentally improves the game for players and fundamentally improves the game for everyone else around the ecosystem as well, whether it's a builder, a developer, an influencer, content creator, an entrepreneur, etc. I think the advantage that we have at Immutable is that we've been doing this for a while now. So the company was started in 2017/18. We've been thinking about this problem for years, even before everyone knew what the word NFT was. And so I think we have the advantage of, also having a live game of God's Own Chain to learn from as well. So we're definitely looking to lead the way here in the industry and looking to have that exist in our games. And then eventually also have that, being shareable to partners who are building on Immutable X as well.
Yeah, thanks for adding that, Derek. I really like the point of how you said there was technology, but people weren't using it for the full potential. It's kind of like YouTube in its early days where, people use it to post cat videos, and people the concept of being able to share your video with anyone in the world, it was quite new at the time, and I think people who obviously knew what this meant for the rest of Web 2 was pretty much that this technology, it just has so much opportunity. And I think, Robbie, back to free-to-play gaming, you mentioned how there's lots of friction between gamers whenever you introduce a new model, and I think that's quite evident with the demographics and gamers especially. And I think the biggest thing with free-to-play is that even when that got introduced, and now it's the biggest games in the world, you got Fortnite. That's literally, they're selling billions in revenue of skins every year, which is kind of crazy. And these players, they never actually own it. So when you kind of think about, will NFT, the model succeed, it's almost like a no-brainer, right? Because now you're kind of actually aligning the incentives between the developer and the player as well, right? And I think...
Well, the rule we use in startups is you have to offer 10 times value to the end consumer in order for them to be sufficiently motivated to switch. That's the disruption law, right? And here we're actually taking it from $0 in value to something. So it's really an infinite transition. And I think that our goal is, how do we shift the expectation from something is intangible, therefore I should not have any property rights, to the future we're going to, which is kids will live in the future in a vastly fully virtual or integrated virtual world. Games will be the experience by which they consume entertainment, movies, music, film, they socialize. And so the goods in these worlds have to be real. And I think that's the philosophical basis to this shift as well, and why the transition from $0 in value to something is so important to get right.
Awesome. And speaking of mainstream studios as well, like how we're going to be creating like a playbook per se, like obviously at Immutable Studios, we're kind of being like the pioneers of the industry and seeing, what works, what doesn't, and how to move forward. So what are your thoughts on mainstream studios just coming in, and do you see them as competitors, or do you feel like they're actually what we need in the space to move forward?
You want to take this, Robbie, or happy to start?
Yeah, sure. Well, no, of course not. I mean, any mainstream game moving into the space we work with. So absolutely not. I think the beautiful thing that Immutable is in the position of is all of the work that Derek is doing on Guild of Guardians, all the work that Clay is doing on Gods Unchained, and the work we've been doing since 2017 to develop these robust economies and strategies, we get to share with these partners. And I think it's hardly a competitive context. We're currently at like 1 million DAO for Web3 games, if that. So really the common enemy is how do we create a better ecosystem to players? How do we create a fairer business model? And so any Web2 studio, even looking remotely at this, I embrace. I think it's amazing. And I think that it is a difficult step to transition these business models, but ultimately there will be much more successful sort of economies that emerge because of this new paradigm.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thanks for that.
I think the opportunity is huge. There's a huge ocean opportunity as well. And I think we're going to also eventually see some differences between studios. Some studios will have different strategic approaches to how they want to integrate blockchain. I think it's probably likely that some more traditional Web2 studios may take a step back and want to observe for a bit, right? Some of them may want to dive and experiment. Some of them may be more encumbered because they're a bigger business. So we're going to see different levels of innovation and different levels of commitment. But overall, the opportunity is big, and the more awareness and buy-in that we have for the industry as a whole, I think the better for everyone, because then that means that the players become adopters of this new type of technology and game as well.
Yeah, and just to expand on that a bit, I think with Rob, you touched on early adopters and the innovation, product life cycle stage, and I think traditionally, companies, they're kind of a lot more hesitant to move towards new models. But I think as time is going on, companies tend to be a bit more forward thinking and innovative. So I was wondering, what are your thoughts on mainstream studios actually coming in terms of timeline? Do you think that, obviously, like every major gaming studio in the world right now probably has a Web3 focused department, right? But how hard do you think these companies are actually going?
I think it'll be a mix. So our biggest bet is that mid-market studios around the 100 million size to 1 billion size are going to be the first to fully embrace it, because they have the flexibility to risk. It is a risky game right now. This stuff has not been done before. If you're Blizzard Activision, it doesn't make sense to immediately pivot to Web3. And I think bigger studios are playing the game of, how do we experiment enough with this technology to know how to compete when it becomes the dominant design? It's the classic innovator's dilemma of, They don't yet want to disrupt themselves, but equally they want to be across these new technologies. And I think we will see meaningful sort of activity from these major studios. It just won't be a full commitment of their entire P&L. But the interest from Web2 studios has been insane. And as I said, I've said before, out of the top 10 biggest sort of Web2 gaming companies in the world, 80% of them or more would have full-time teams working on Web3 game design. That's how much of an opportunity and a threat they view this. And our goal is, how can we help shift these companies to succeed in the Web3 space while having really successful business models?
Awesome. And did you want to add to that as well, Derek?
I think Robbie captured it pretty well. The other thing to add is, good games take a long time. And I think obviously the focus for us and also the focus for a lot of the studios is building good games. And so I would expect it's going to take a while for them to design, build, launch, these games. But I expect in the next 2 to 3 years, we're going to see quite a lot of good games come online. And that's kind of where we'll see a really big shift in an industry from some of these other players coming in.
Yeah, and there's obviously like things like Stigma and like these established companies, they already have like a consumer base that already have, set expectations. And it's a lot harder for a company to kind of pivot, because as you see, some mainstream companies, they're trying to introduce NFTs or blockchain and they face a lot of backlash, right? For example, at a company like Immutable, the people who are, our stakeholders and people within the community, they're obviously supportive of NFTs, right? So I think we also have that additional flexibility there as well. And yeah, of course, at the end of the day, we're a rapidly growing startup as well. So there's lots of, advantages that we have moving at the space that we are. And so the next question is for you, Derek. So a lot of people, when they think of blockchain games and mobile games in particular, they're quick to point out their pay-to-win nature. So at Guild of Guardians, we actually tend to communicate quite often that we aren't actually a pay-to-win game. So can you please expand on how that is the case?
Yes. So the first thing is, currently many blockchain games require you to buy an NFT to play in the first place. So there is an entry fee, which increases significantly the barrier of entry and may create the perception of pay to win, so to speak. So the first and foremost for Guild of Guardians, again, our goal is to have hundreds of millions of people playing. We want to make this as accessible as possible. And so the game is actually free to play, and you don't actually need to necessarily interact with the blockchain if you don't want to. I think the second element where the idea of pay to win comes in is where players can spend money on items or in-game items that ruin the experience for other players. And we see this most commonly in PvP games, and it really depends on the definition of winning. So what often happens is someone might spend, $20,000 and they start beating up all these other players, in the arena or in whatever, and all these other players start complaining because they can't compete with them without also spending $10,000. So that's kind of where a lot of the pay-to-win frustration comes in. For Guild of Guardians, we are more focused on the social aspect, the cooperative aspect, and the cooperative competitive aspect. So instead of you as a player spending $10,000 and ruining the experience for 100 other players, actually, the game's more about you working together with your team. So when someone is spending $10,000, the guild members celebrate it. It helps them. They benefit as well. And it's these teams versus these other teams rather than having an individual kind of PvP system. So for us, we look at the definition of winning, because I think the ability to trade is going to be in the game. That's part of the nature of blockchain. And so really it's up to us to make sure that the ability to trade assets doesn't ruin the player experience, because that's ultimately what comes first.
Yeah, thanks for expanding on that, Derek. I think it was really important to address that question, because I feel like it's a common critique whenever you see like in the YouTube comments or Reddit comments, it's like, it's a blockchain game, it's pay to win. And I think I also want to comment, just on a side note, like it's really great to just see transparency between, Web3 game development teams, because I feel like, in traditional gaming, like the developers, they shy away from like the harder questions, right? And we're here right now in live streaming, tackling on the real concerns and the issues that people actually have with blockchain and tackling it head front. So I think it really speaks volumes of of the space. And
one other thing I might add as well is, if we think about economies, like a real world economy, everyone has almost different roles. So the way we also think about Web3 economies is that there should be different ways to play. There should be ways to engage which don't require any money, which are still considered valuable, which are still rewarding. And there may be ways which require people to compete at the very top and they're spending money. So I think there's many different ways to play, and that's what a real economy is. There's not just one single play style, right? And when you start adding in these additional layers that kind of Robbie mentioned before around outside of the game, that's where it gets super interesting. But I think that's another aspect as well where, there's, asynchronous elements in the game where actually, spending doesn't add an advantage.
Awesome. Thanks for that, Derek. So let's zoom out a little now. So in 2021, we had a huge inflow of capital into the gaming space. And how there's generally like a big lag time between the funding and actual products. The games obviously take a long time to build, Derek. And I know you actually wrote an article on this recently. So what's your outlook on the blockchain gaming space over the next few years, considering the lag between the actual funding versus the time it takes to develop? I'll let Derek answer this one first.
Okay, thank you, Ryan. So I don't have the exact numbers on this, but the last time I checked, there have been over $8 billion, raised by blockchain gaming studios since 2021. And I think the first thing is that is a massive amount of capital, and that capital is being raised by incredibly talented teams who believe strongly in the vision of Web3, just like we do, right? And they're building products right now. They're growing their teams. It's almost reaching the stage where it's too big to fail. The amount of talent coming in is huge, and the amount of capital that's been invested is huge, right? So that's kind of the first trend. We've also seen recently in the industry, we've been talking at Immutable for a while, but there's now a bigger focus on kind of the game part and less of a focus on the economy part. And I think that what this means is that we're going to see a lot of these teams really focusing less on the, gamified economy aspects of, the spreadsheet simulator type games, and more on the how do we build a really good core experience and how do we make that actually better for players using, blockchain and economy. So the quality expectation of games, I think, is going to increase as well. And then in terms of the lag time, yes, I think it's going to take, a lot of these teams are just getting started. They don't have the same necessary advantage that we do of having started much earlier. And so they're just getting started. It's going to take them some time to ramp up. And it's going to take some time for them to build and get their prototypes to market. So there will be a bit of delay, I expect, moving into 2023, now 2024, from seeing some of these games actually hitting the market.
Awesome, Derek. Thanks for that. And Robbie, of course, you're always very deep in the latest developments in the space. So what are your insights on this question?
I completely agree with Des. I won't add too much more. I think the hardest people to convince are developers and VCs. So the leading indicator is what they're spending their time on, and the biggest talent in gaming is all flocking to Web3. There is out of the $50 billion bucket of VC capital earmarked for Web3, the largest chunk of that bucket is gaming. So all of the money and the minds are saying this is where the next $1 trillion economy is going to emerge. The stats say this is where the next $1 trillion economy is going to emerge. And that's not a made up number. If you look at any financial market in history, as soon as you take an economy and you make it truly tradable, you get secondary financial markets, options, index funds, derivatives that emerge, and they're typically an order of magnitude larger than the underlying value of the assets. There's $100 billion spent on games every year in primary demand alone, let alone the secondary market capitalization of this stuff. And so as soon as you place a multiplier on that, this quickly becomes one of the most powerful financial ecosystems in the world. And so the things I'm excited about is, in 5 years' time, we'll have Goldman Sachs trading desks creating long and short options, or index funds for people to go long 2022 John Wick Fortnite skins, and short maybe the latest collection of Halo collectibles. And I think there's going to be this fascinating interaction between game design and what games are being built and the economic side of this too. So this is absolutely a forcing function.
Awesome. Thanks for that, Robbie. And so this leads me on to my next question as well, and this is for both of you. For blockchain gaming to go mainstream, is it going to be a breakthrough title similar to Axie Infinity, which creates that aha moment, or do you think it's going to be a much longer process? I'll let, whoever wants to take this.
So I think that there's a few things here, right? I think number one is the quality of the games and products. I think the number two thing is around kind of industry sentiment. So currently, like we just kind of talked on, the quality of blockchain games that as an aggregate kind of aren't up to par with what players expect. And so it's hard to bring in like these 2 to 3 billion gamers into Web3 gaming without the core quality products. That is something that a lot of teams are working on. This is something that we're working on as well. And then the second part is around the perception. And so a lot of people in the gaming industry or in any industry, they're reluctant to change. Change is scary. They are worried that developers are going to be exploiting this new technology for monetary gain. They're going to be worried about the environmental impacts. They're going to be worried about, all these different things that come with change. And so to tie it back to the question of, what's it going to take? I think having, a few hit titles that really demonstrate here is what a great blockchain game looks like to the industry. And this is what a business model looks like for these games. And here is a technology that, and a studio that's not a scam, that's environmentally friendly or carbon neutral like Immutable X. I think having a few examples like that is what's going to really move the industry forward, because they're going to become talking points and really big case studies that bring people in to the game, either directly because they're playing it or indirectly because they're just learning about it and they see it as an example.
Awesome. And what were your thoughts on the question, Robbie?
Yeah, look, I think I broadly agree. I do think we'll see hits, right? Like gaming is hit driven in general. It's all power law dominated. The top 10 games make more revenue than the next 100. And I do think that if we can get these growth levers right and a sustainable growth driven lever, then we'll see quite rapidly, one hit and then a whole bunch of people be able to follow. Because at the end of the day, if the supply of content is there, it's just about how can we effectively design the incentives and the growth mechanisms that leverage Web3 to make these games very successful very quickly. And obviously we are, look, I'm personally extremely bullish on Gods Unchained, Guild of Guardians, and some of our portfolio content like Illuvium and Ember Sword, which I think is going to be, these have been the games that have been worked on for, in some cases, 4.5 years, in other cases at minimum 18 months, and they're going to be the first AAA content that will hit the market.
Yeah, no, awesome. And it's the games you mentioned, the Gods Unchained, Guild Guardians, Illuviums, they're all different genres as well, which I think is super important, because whenever, mainstream people come in, obviously there can be that one big blockbuster game, but sometimes the genre that people play, it's not quite their taste. So when we have this, wide array of blockchain games that people can try out, it really makes a huge difference, right? And I kind of also want to go back into the macro picture, right? So I think the elephant in the room is a lot of people, they're on the sidelines, they're a bit afraid because of the current market conditions, right? And so I think I want you to comment, Robbie, on, so with the current bear market, how is Immutable actually positioned? And Derek, you can obviously comment on how Guild of Guardians is positioned and how we're operating through this process.
Yeah, so Immutable was born in the biggest bear market of all time, which was the 2018 bear market. And I think it was the best thing that happened to the company, because it meant with Gods Unchained and with our platform, we had to focus on what would truly be something which people would want to use. And our metrics weren't papered over by crazy token incentives or the types of mechanisms you get in a bull run. And I think that's incredibly important to building product market fit in Web3. From a cash perspective, Immutable has over $300 million. We're growing from 300 people today to 400 by the end of the year. We have a great deal of runway, but also we know the opportunity and the sizing in front of us. And now it's not really time to pull those punches, especially when we still have an enormous amount of interest from these Web2 game studios who, if they come today, will launch in 18 to 24 months, which is certainly when we'll be back in a better place in the macro environment. So I'm really happy for it. I think it creates a great competitive environment for Immutable where we can operate with discipline and financial discipline and potentially look at acquiring other companies to help us grow in this time period in a clever way. But also, I think it just means there's a lot better signal to noise ratio in the industry, where the people who stick around in these times are people working on, in the vast majority of cases, legitimate products, rather than shipping, a crappy PFP project every 2 weeks with a hyped Discord and then failing to deliver on anything.
Yeah, 100%. I think as everyone says, bear markets are the time to always build, right? And I think also the second point is that the noise is just so much lower. And like you said, like any project can just launch in the bull market, and people kind of, they stay away from the boring topics like, the fundamentals, which teams actually have the funding to deliver on the roadmap, things like that. But these things just matter so much more in the bear. And, there's also the opportunities for, acquiring people from other projects that are unfortunately not doing as well. And Derek,
I'll add one more thing, Ryan, before I jump on, which is just gaming in particular as an industry is decorrelated from the macro, right? So it's actually counter-recessionary. People play games more when we're in an economic recession. They do spend slightly less, so it nets out. But when you look at Gods Unchained trades today, they've gone down 8%. PFPs on average are down 80%. And that's because people trade these cards for $1 because they want to use it in a deck. And that has been what Immutable has been obsessed with from day one. We want people to buy assets en masse with hundreds of millions of players so they can be empowered to truly own digital objects and use it for a reason rather than just buying speculative content. And so I think out of all Web3 categories, gaming is the one which will be the least sort of impacted by my macro in terms of adoption and utility. And this is why I think a huge portion of VC funds is flowing in right now.
Yeah, 100%. I think it's funny to see how much of the world actually still think of, digital pictures on, OpenSea. And I know you actually mentioned this point a few times in a lot of your AMAs. And of course, that's in its own niche. It's quite, quite exciting. It's cool and everything. But at the end of the day, the true mass adoption is going to happen from utility-driven NFTs, right? Just like gaming. And so, Derek, I think going back to the question as well, how is GOG actually positioned during the bear market, and what are we doing during this time?
So, yeah, completely agree with what Robbie said. And I think the main thing is that both Guild of Guardians and Immutable, I think we're unique. And we're unique in that the bear market is actually an opportunity and a good thing for us. I don't think that's the case for every company. And the reason we're in this unique position is because of, one is the runway and the capital that we've already had. Two is that we have been, we've been through this before. We haven't been, spending all of our money during the bull run, and for that reason we can still grow. I think the third one is we're very focused on the fundamentals of the game, and I think during a bear market or during a period where prices are depressed, where conversation is depressed, that's what actually shines most. It almost becomes a good entry point for when we bring in, we have an opportunity to bring in hundreds of millions of new players with an opportunity to be aggressive when others have to cut back. And so overall, I think that it's an opportunity for both Guild of Guardians and Immutable because of the position that we're in and because of the strategy that we've had this whole time. So we're still very focused on achieving our mission, which is we want to build a really meaningful game that, spearheads this industry, which people are really proud to have played, people are proud to have worked on. And we're still, very confident that we're moving along that path.
Yeah, so I think it's pretty clear that we're focused on the long-term picture right now. And although, in the short-term token prices, NFTs, they might be, quite volatile, but, Immutable, Guild of Guardians, obviously we're focused on the bigger picture. And that kind of leads me to the next question. And this one's for you, Robbie. In terms of Immutable Studio, we obviously have the platform side of the business and then Immutable Studio, which obviously features Guild of Guardians and Gods Unchained. So what's your actual vision for Immutable Studio, in the next 3 to 5 years, let's just say that, for how many games you think we'd expand to, what things are going to change? Can you please expand on that?
Of course. I think the vision is to create multiple games with 100 million players each that really define what an excellent, high quality, utility driven Web3 game looks like, and then to use those learnings to help the whole industry get there. Because I think Immutable is in a really privileged position where every game we deal with on the platform side of the business is genuinely seeking a lot of advice on how they can enter this space right. It's a pretty terrifying space if you're a Web2 company and you're trying to play with smart contracts, you're trying to learn game design for immutable and unchangeable economies once you set them in stone. That's why we build API-based interactions, so you never have to touch that. That's why we build these playbooks, so you can have a fully proven economy before you implement it into your game. And I think that's why Guild of Guardians and Gods Unchained are in such a tremendous position, because their success can define what those playbooks look like for the rest of the industry. So I won't spoil too much about our future plans on the studio side. I'll leave that to Justin and Derek and Clay to share more vision on. But needless to say, we've more than, I think, tripled the team size in the studio business over the last year. I know Guild of Guardians has gone from 5 people to 30. So we're making huge investments in this side of the business. And I have very high ambitions over the next 3 to 5 years.
Awesome. Yeah, we'll definitely not share any spoilers regarding the game studio. And I think the next question is going to be more of a fun one. So I know, Robbie, I believe in the past you mentioned that VR, people are going to be spending more time in VR than they actually do in real life, right? And so what's your crazy, I want to see both of yours, what's your crazy, Ready Player One type of scenario in the future? Whoever wants to take it first. I reckon Robbie looks excited to take this one. So.
Oh, Des, you go.
Yeah, I think like the idea of the metaverse gets thrown around a lot. And I think what we're eventually going to see is some version of this where people have kind of their digital profile, and then they spend a lot of their time online. We've been seeing a continual shift in things moving online, being more digital. I think VR is, as a technology, very good representation of yourself in the digital world, very good way to interact with different environments. I think it'll just be one form of it. Not everything necessarily needs to be you're plugged into a computer 24/7, fluids going to your body and just living in this VR universe. Sounds a bit dystopian, but I think we're moving in the direction. And as the experiences come online, as things like interoperability get explored, as fundamental technologies like VR improves, in the long term, I think we're going to see people spending more and more time in these virtual worlds. Our kids are probably going to grow up in these virtual worlds and, be doing things that we have no idea how they work, right? And so excited for that long-term change, hopefully for the better.
Awesome. Thanks for that, Jarek. And yeah, I'm very excited to hear what Robbie has to say about this.
I think if you draw it to its conclusion, we'll end up in near perfect fidelity simulations of any universe in a digital landscape. There is the argument we're in a simulation today. And I think if that is the case, then it is absolutely essential that we make sure that the property rights of those goods we use in that world are decentralized, are fair, and aren't charged 52% on every transaction by Meta. So that's, I guess, the crazy extension, but absolutely, we're going to start seeing stuff over the next couple of decades that not just virtual reality, but augmenting real reality that will change the way that people truly interact. And I think the closest example of this is how social dynamics have changed drastically with the invention of technology or the advent of technology over the last 20 years. Dating has fundamentally changed. In any other century, the invention of the dating app would have been the most culturally impactful invention ever. We've literally changed meeting habits fundamentally if you look at the statistics from how and where people meet. In 2022, it's just another blip. And so we're seeing an incredibly rapid cultural revolution based on the way that humans interact with each other based on technology. And so I'm very excited, I think, for some of it. Some of it we have to approach really carefully. And that's, I think, the mission-driven side of Immutable is to make sure this stuff is secure, is decentralized, and can't just actually be, a blockchain in emperor's clothing where there's no security under the hood.
Yeah, you make a really good point about, for example, dating, like how people meeting online more than they do in real life. And just like, Immutable, we're literally like fully remote company, right? And we're all interacting from all parts of the globe. So it's kind of clear to see, which path we're going to and exactly why it's so important that people have actual digital ownership over their assets in the future, right? And I know that's something, you and Immutable are super passionate about. And so I think I want to wrap it up today with the final question. So Robbie, I wanted to say the crypto space has obviously been heavily stigmatized, especially with the recent emergence of NFTs last year. And when you dropped out of university all those years back and decided to start your own blockchain based company, you obviously had a vision. And to this day, your thesis on what blockchain technology can do for the world probably hasn't changed. So what would your message be to people who are sitting on the sidelines and skeptical about what NFTs can do for the world as well as gaming?
Look, I don't know if I'd send them a message as much as I'd just build them an excellent game, which they use. And under the hood, they start using this technology with no idea of what it is. That's success, because we're not going to get to 1 billion players by evangelizing technology. End-to-end encryption or search or Facebook didn't become important because it evangelized the benefits of end-to-end encryption or aggregating content on the internet or organizing a social graph. It just made excellent experiences which delivered value. And I think that's the goal with Web3.
That's awesome. I love that answer. There's just no fairy talking. It's just pretty much where it's going to deliver the best product possible, and then you'll make the switch. And I think if that's not bullish, I don't know what is, guys. But yeah, I think that wraps it up. Does anyone has any final questions that we can maybe take in these last few minutes? Feel free to drop it down in the comments. And yeah, we'll get some comments up here as well. So when will GOG include blockchain? So we have our alpha testnet in the second half of the year, which will be on testnet. So that's when we'll have our first blockchain integration. Okay. Interesting question from Y here. Do you see the royalty structure on NFTs potentially changing? Anyone want to take this one?
Yeah, I guess yes and yeah, it can always change, right? I think, I wouldn't say anyone has figured out the perfect model or number right now, but I think the idea of a royalty, which comes back to the fundamental idea of, using technology to align incentives between participants, is kind of fundamental and is probably going to be here for a while. So the idea of, example being, an artist sells an NFT and they get continued royalties on that. That's like a fundamental part of blockchain, which I think is going to stay here. In terms of the specific numbers, yeah, sure, that might change.
Yeah, it is quite a broad question. And I think at the end of the day, it's always going to be about aligning incentives, right, between the developers and the players and finding that balance. Interesting question here from Jess. So do you plan on having cross-gaming NFTs between games like GOG and Gods Unchained? Probably not very possible or feasible at the moment, but how about in the future, guys?
Yes, TBC. Nothing planned at the moment, but the advantage of kind of us working quite closely is that we can do things like this. So it's things that were just discussed before. Nothing imminent I can share right now.
No worries. And here's a question from Relevant Athlete. Plans to make a wallet easier to use for mobile games. So I know for Guild Guardians, we actually have a custodial wallet option. If you want to expand on that, Derek, to really make the onboarding experience much easier for the end user.
Absolutely. So we, as much as possible, want to make the blockchain part invisible for those who don't want to know about the blockchain part, right? And so this means not even knowing that you have a wallet necessarily. You just have your account. It's in the back end connected to a wallet, and you can do things with it, and you just know that it's secure. That's the kind of experience I want to deliver that matches the experience that gamers expect today. So in short, yes.
Yeah, I think if we really onboard the masses, it's going to be kind of unrealistic to expect everyone to kind of be looking after their own keys, although that is kind of the ethos of blockchain, right? But I think people do kind of need that option when they're coming in. And I think that's going to probably wrap it up for today, guys. So I hope everyone enjoyed it as much as people are enjoying the GOG demo. And we actually appreciate everyone who's taken the time to play test and provide the feedback, and even just come onto the live stream today and just ask questions, interact with us. And if you haven't already, make sure to join our Discord and follow us on Twitter to stay up with the latest Guild Guardian updates. And I'll also leave Derek and Robbie's Twitter in the YouTube description, as they both have high quality posts that they always post. And if you guys want to see the sharpest minds in this space, make sure to throw them a follow. I think that wraps it up today, guys. So until next time, goodbye. Thank you, Robbie and Derek.
Thanks, Ryan. Thanks, Derek.